BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Tuesday. Welcome to the special bonus episode of Black Box Online Radio. In the past, I used to do a Tuesday segment about the murder of JonBenet Ramsey from 1996, perhaps America's most famous unsolved mystery. And in this episode, I'm going to pick up where I left off with that previous series because there are still 2 episodes that I wanted to make as well as to discuss with you guys here on Black Box Online Radio. In this one, I will be discussing the transcript from the 911 call, looking at Denise Diane Huddle's book on the murder of JonBenet, which is actually one of the chapters or sections, I should say sections, is dedicated to the JonBenet Ramsey case. Of course, continuing with Lawrence Schiller's Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, and even looking at some related true crime cases and issues. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the case of JonBenet Ramsey. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Black Box Ned. On December 26 of 1996, JonBenet Ramsey was found dead in the basement of her Boulder, Colorado home, where she lived with her mother Patsy, her father John, and her brother Burke. She was found in a room that has been called the wine cellar, which was a room that shouldn't have been known or labeled in that way to many people. Her father John Ramsey openly stated that no one outside of the family should have known about the wine cellar. She was found with duct tape over her mouth, her hands and wrists were bound, as well as having a very large head wound, which wasn't noticed immediately, but there was actually an 8.5-inch crack in her skull. She had also been strangled with a garrote, and whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And before JonBenet's body was discovered, a ransom note was left at the foot of the stairs, and her mother Patsy actually woke up very early on December 26th, Boxing Day morning. She goes down the stairs, and she finds this 2.5-page ransom note that is saying all of these bizarre things. It says that, firstly, it's addressed to John Ramsey, and it says that they have JonBenet, they have his daughter, and that they want $118,000 or she will be beheaded. It states that there is one person writing the note and that there are 2 men who are looking over JonBenet. And if any attempt is made to contact law enforcement, then again, she will be killed. And it also gives instructions on how John should get the money and how he should await the phone call and how to arrange for the exchange of the funds in return for JonBenet Ramsey. That's the basic introduction to the story, and I have a standalone episode about the ransom note if anyone wants to hear more about that. But I would actually like to look at the transcript from the 911 call, and we can have some types of responses, as well as looking at the comments from Denise Diane Huddle in her book about what she thinks about the ransom note and the phone call. The first is, the dispatcher says, 911 emergency. Patsy Ramsey says, police. What's going on, ma'am? Patsy says, 755 15th Street. What's going on there, ma'am? Patsy says, we have a kidnapping. Hurry, please. The dispatcher says, explain to me what's going on. Patsy says, we have a note. There's a note left and our daughter is gone. The dispatcher says, a note was left and your daughter is gone? Patsy says, yes. The dispatcher says, how old is your daughter? Patsy says, she's 6 years old. She's blonde, 6 years old. The dispatcher says, how long ago was this? Patsy says, I don't know. I just got the note and my daughter's gone. The dispatcher says, does it say who took her? Patsy says, what? The dispatcher says, does it say who took her? Patsy says, no, I don't know. There's a ransom note here. The dispatcher says, it's a ransom note? Patsy says, it says SBTC Victory. Please. The dispatcher says, okay, what's your name? Are you... Patsy interrupts by saying, Patsy Ramsey, I'm the mother. Oh my God, please. The dispatcher says, okay, I'm sending an officer over, okay? Patsy Ramsey says, please. The dispatcher says, do you know how long she's been gone? Patsy says, no, I don't. Please, we just got up and she's not here. Oh my God, please. The dispatcher says, "Okay, calm." Patsy interrupts by saying, "Please send somebody." The dispatcher says, "I am, honey." Patsy says, "Please," once again. The dispatcher says, "Take a deep breath," and Patsy disregards that and says, "Hurry, hurry, hurry." And then this is when Patsy thinks that the dispatcher is no longer talking to her. The dispatcher will repeat her name and say, "Patsy, Patsy." And then Patsy says, "Operator, can you help me end this call?" And I'm actually going to read the very next line in Denise Diane Huddle's book when she says, "Apparently at this point, Patsy Ramsey believed that she had hung up the phone and she had quit communicating with the operator." I've been saying dispatcher, but this would be operator. Okay, dispatcher, operator, let's use them interchangeably in this episode. However, the line was not disconnected, and some gargled voices can still be heard in the background. Now, I'm going to be very clear with you guys that during this episode, it's going to sound like I'm all over the map. Sometimes I'm going to sound like I'm thinking the Ramseys are guilty. Sometimes I'm going to sound like the Ramseys are innocent. And there are two reasons for that. One is we can genuinely evaluate the evidence. This is a strong point. This is a weak point. And also, if you read Denise Diane Huddle's book, which is actually called Anthrax to Zodiac, but it talks about many different true crime cases, and there's a section on the murder of JonBenet Ramsey, she also plays the map at the beginning. At first, I thought she was just absolutely gung-ho that the Ramseys were involved and it was Burke. Then she puts up all the counter evidence, and I thought she had a reversal, thinking, "Oh, hey, wait, well, what's going on? Maybe she doesn't think that the Ramseys were involved." And then ultimately she gets to the conclusion, which I'll talk about later. But what did you hear in the not the ransom note, what did you hear in the 911 call? Because I heard quite a lot of things that stood out to me. One thing that Denise Diane Huddle points out in her book is that, firstly, Patsy was instructed directly not to call 911, and she did anyway. It said very clearly in the ransom note that if they try to contact the authorities, JonBenet will die. If they tamper with the money for the ransom, JonBenet will die. Yet, Patsy chose to call 911 anyway. Do you think that that's suspicious? I personally do not. No matter what you think about the Ramseys as suspects, whether you think it was John, Patsy, or Burke, or it was an intruder, or someone outside of the Ramsey family, I don't think that that specific action is suspicious at all. If somebody woke up and found this 2.5-page ransom note at the foot of the stairs, went to JonBenet's bedroom and didn't see her there, I don't think it's odd to call 911 for the following reason. I think that's because she was just trying to do something. The alternative would be to wait until maybe 8 in the morning when they said that they were going to make a call, or that maybe even wait until the next day when they said that they were going to make a call. I mean, we've talked about the discrepancy in the ransom note when it says, "I'll call you the next day at 8 a.m. And then, I mean, are they just going to sit around when JonBenet is gone and wait for this person to stay in control of the situation? I think a lot of people would have gone to the authorities because it shows that they are not playing the games with the criminals. They're not playing the criminals' game. And I really don't think that that is something that indicates any guilt at all on the part of Patsy Ramsey. But what do you guys think? You can put your response in the comment section down below. The second point that is raised in this book is in regards to Patsy recalling the information about the SBTC. SBTC victory is how the ransom note is concluded. And then Patsy is able to say that during the phone call. Denise Diane Huddle actually thinks that that's very suspicious on the part of Patsy Ramsey, saying something to the effect of, "Well, don't you think it's odd that she would use that exact verbiage that she had only read minutes before, that she had only read when she picked up the note, and saying that stuff so clearly? Doesn't that suggest that she has thought about it before?" And to be honest, I don't think so. I don't think so that that's just like been in her mind for hours or something like that. I don't think that the 911 call suggests any of that. In fact, I just think that she was answering the dispatcher when it said, the dispatcher said, "Is there whose name is on the note?" Something to that effect that you heard when I was reading off the transcript. Patsy says, "I don't know. It says SBTC victory." Now we can talk about the meaning of those words later on. But I just think that she was answering a question that was asked to her. And I don't necessarily think that means that she was keeping it in the back of her mind for hours and hours. But I would love to know your responses. What do you guys think about this? Overall, I think that Patsy actually sounds like she is somewhat natural when she is responding to the 911 call. And again, I don't think there's anything suspicious about making the call. And also, Patsy also makes calls to the Whites, to Fleet White, and the other family friends. And Denise Diane Huddle says she's also going against the instructions of the alleged kidnappers when they say if you contact anyone, she will die. But that just shows that she's not playing the games. She's taking action, and she is trying to do something as opposed to just sitting around waiting, and that's an instinct response in my own personal opinion. But Denise Diane Huddle also talks about how Patsy Ramsey is John Ramsey's second wife. She was John Ramsey's second wife. She has now passed away from ovarian cancer, and she might not have been the picture-perfect housewife, so to speak, because Patsy does have a very odd personality, even though she was a former beauty queen, and she was a former Miss West Virginia, actually, from my great state of West Virginia, but she does have an awkward personality, and she does say things in a bizarre way when she's being interviewed. She also has weird emotional responses, and she might have been self-medicating in some types of ways to deal with stress. I'm going to end that discussion. But what do you think about anything that you heard in the ransom note? And of course, Denise Diane Huddle was very keen to pick up on how they were possibly under the impression that the phone call had ended, and you can still hear voices in the background. Well, I think the fairest way of putting it is you can hear noises after the 911 call. And could one of the voices be Burke? That's something that has been discussed, just ad nauseum on the internet, and we aren't necessarily 100% sure. But as a former private investigator, perhaps even a current private investigator, I mean, the reason why Denise Diane Huddle wrote this book is because she refers to herself as a snarky private investigator, and she wanted to give her take on the subjects. And she says that really there are just two major things that are going on with the investigation about how this case fell apart. Why did the JonBenet Ramsey case not get solved? Well, number one, the first officer on site was Detective Linda Arndt, and when she arrived there, she didn't seal the perimeter, she didn't gather everyone into one room, she didn't limit who was coming in and out of the house. They should have had complete knowledge about who was there and also in what rooms were the people moving. And Linda Arndt is the one who actually proposes the top-to-bottom search, going from the top of the house all the way down to the basement. Yet John Ramsey starts looking for JonBenet in the basement. Okay, so firstly, that deals with the collection of evidence, contaminations, and also, if everybody had just stayed in one location, gather everybody in one location, then they would at least know where people are moving and how things could be tracked. The second is that John and Patsy were able to spend an enormous amount of time together alone without anybody supervising them. This could have created another problem, and she says it so clearly in the book. They could have had a story to get straight, and whether they're guilty or innocent, the possibility would have existed where they can just say, okay, this is what we're going to tell the authorities, if they were indeed involved. And at that point, when Detective Arndt arrives, as well as all the other members of law enforcement, they should have treated the Ramseys as suspects. And this book even talks about some of the statistics involving parents being involved in the homicides of their own children, especially somebody who was as young as JonBenet, who was 6 years old. Then they should have prevented them from talking by themselves, even whispering, so then they can try and stay on the same page and get everything straight in case they're questioned. Then they can both just give the same generic responses. All of this stuff should have been monitored, and it was not. And you guys can see the end result, that this case has still not been solved. So that's one. So those are the things as an investigator that she calls out, and I completely agree with all of that. The things that I disagree with more is, well, the two things that I just discussed right there about how and why she thinks that the 911 call is suspicious. Another point is, she says that Burke Ramsey was actually taken out of the house and was able to go with family friends for a time being when these types of searches and investigations were taking place. And I'm just thinking, well, now if she had such a big problem with the Ramseys being unsupervised and not being able to get their story straight, or the Ramseys are unsupervised and they had the opportunity to get their story straight, well then wouldn't it be very well, how does this factor in that Burke gets to go out of the house? Wouldn't that go against the theory that the Ramseys were involved? I mean, how could Burke be involved with getting the story straight if he's not even present, if he's been removed from the house? I mean, how can he be involved with this if you think that Burke is the suspect? Or just John and Patsy going to concoct something? And I mean, the only way that I could reconcile that was just thinking that they might tell Burke something to the effect of, "You don't know anything, you were asleep the whole time." And that would be the end of discussion. And maybe that is what she was thinking if Burke is indeed her suspect, but I'll get to that later on. I told you guys that there is a section where it seems like she is maybe arguing against the Ramseys being the culpable individuals, and the 7th chapter of her book is actually called The Suspects. And she talks about one that I've never done a standalone episode on before in the past, and his name was Robert Christian Wolfe. And she openly says that in the book The Death of Innocence, written by John and Patsy, they point toward Robert Christian Wolfe as one of the suspects. And some of the things about him is that he wrote multiple articles stating that he was upset with John Ramsey and made comments about his business. He demonstrated very clearly and publicly that he had a grudge against John Ramsey, and he also had a t-shirt that said Santa Barbara Tennis Club, and then those have the initials SBTC. Now, you guys already might be laughing when you're hearing something like that. The first part about having a grudge, absolutely that person needs to be investigated. Santa Barbara Tennis Club, that might just be an after effect. I mean, does the ransom note say Santa Barbara Tennis Club? I mean, there are going to be lots of things that have SBTC as the initials. How about Saved by the Cross, which would be a much more plausible one than Santa Barbara Tennis Club? Is there some reason why you think that the writer and the author of the ransom note connected it to a t-shirt? I mean, that's just finding something that has the letters SBTC as the initials and trying to attach it. Furthermore, the ransom note is not even about Santa Barbara, so that is something that I think is a very weak point, unless hypothetically he actually is the killer, then work backwards. But I mean, as a standalone piece of evidence, it's a weak piece of evidence. But the thing about the grudge, investigate everybody who would have had a grudge against John Ramsey. And there's another person that's mentioned in the book, and his name is Bill McReynolds. And if Dr. Casbah is listening to this, Dr. Casbah would like to hear that because his suspect is named Bill McReynolds. Bill McReynolds is the person who played Santa Claus at the Christmas party that JonBenet Ramsey attended, and during the investigations that are discussed in the book Perfect Murder, Perfect Town by Lawrence Schiller, there's even this statement from Bill McReynolds, which is shared about second-hand and third-hand, where somebody's saying he told JonBenet that she was going to get a special visit from Santa Claus, and then, well, she's murdered after the Christmas party. And they also wanted to point out that the Ramsey family was very suspicious of that statement, and it wasn't something that was just made in an innocent way. When someone says, something like that, that could just be holiday fun, right? Oh, little girl, you're 6 years old, you're going to get a special visit from Santa. Well, if this person ended up dead, yes, of course you should be suspicious of that. But Dr. Casbah has really gone to very great lengths to look at all the things that Bill McReynolds could have been accused of. And in this book does, though, have a section on Michael Helgoth, but I've also discussed him, and I have a standalone episode on him. I absolutely think Michael Helgoth was not the murderer, even though for a while he was my top suspect. John Mark Carr is also somebody who has been accused of being the murderer of JonBenet Ramsey. He's discussed in the book. I absolutely don't think he was either. I think he was a liar who was just playing games. And of course, this book also mentions Gary Oliva, and I have an episode about him. Gary Oliva is still a reasonable suspect, even though there is a little bit of contradictory evidence against him, but he did make a phone call shortly after the murder, and he was telling somebody that he did something bad, that he hurt a little girl. It does not have a specific confession, but there is still there's still a type of suspicion that we can have about Gary Oliva. Some other things that Denise Diane Huddle was writing about in her book that might suggest that she was not thinking that the Ramseys were guilty is that the paintbrush that was used to make the garrote that killed JonBenet was from Patsy's paint set in the basement. It appears that somebody broke the paintbrush and turned it into the garrote with rope, but also the head of the paintbrush was not found on the Ramsey property. And does this not suggest that somebody took it with them when they were leaving the house? You could say yes, you could say no. I'll turn it over to you guys. What does that suggest? And also, there was a hair that was found in JonBenet's nether regions, and, even in this book by Denise Diane Huddle, it talks about the possibility of JonBenet being sexually assaulted with the paintbrush, which is a terrible, terrible thing to say. And Denise Diane Huddle also talks about there is not exactly a documented history of sexual abuse if we trust the family pediatrician and so on. So then wouldn't that suggest that this was a sexual predator who was outside of the Ramsey family? And there is a very big section in this book on the DNA evidence, when she says that there was DNA that was found on JonBenet's legs, found on the waistband of her underwear. By legs, I mean the legging long johns, the waistband of her underwear, and underneath her fingernails. The Ramseys all provided DNA, yet they were not matches. And ultimately, we'll just get to the reversal chapters and the concluding counter-arguments at the end, when she's talking about how, should we look at the DNA evidence and take it seriously? Her response is no, because we cannot rule out contaminants, and this is a theory that has been discussed online, once again, ad nauseum. Could the DNA that was found on JonBenet's clothing be from a factory worker who prepared the items when they were about to be sent overseas? Could this be from somebody who handled them before they went into the packaging, and that's why there's male DNA on it? Because Susanna Ryan of Pure Gold Forensics, who is one of the commentators who is an expert on DNA analysis and evidence, she also appeared on the Citizen Detective podcast, but she was on Court TV, and she said, most likely it's the same person's DNA that is under the long johns as well as on the waistband of the underwear. One man, one perpetrator. And if you were to ask me, I would think it's from the killer. But could this be from somebody who handled the garments when they were in the packages, and like it gets transferred from the leggings to the underwear? I mean, what do you guys think? I say it's from the killer, but I would love to know your responses. And ultimately, she says, though, that anybody who has been eliminated by DNA should be put back into the suspect pool, because if the DNA evidence is that unreliable, no one should be exonerated from the DNA evidence. Not Patsy Ramsey, not John Ramsey, and not Burke Ramsey. Those are her words, and that's what's discussed in the book here. But there's also a very big section in the book that is devoted to challenge questions. And you guys, the listeners of Black Box Online Radio, know that I cannot resist challenge questions. Some of them here would be in regards to the pineapple that was consumed by JonBenet. During the autopsy, they found this colored substance in JonBenet's system that appeared to have been from pineapple that she would have eaten shortly before she died. And, I mean, how did it get there, and what on earth happened? But I told you there was a challenge question, and it says, if there was an intruder, was this raising an alarm when a stranger was in the family home fixing her a snack in the middle of the night? ? I thought about this so much. And if you were to entertain an intruder theory, I mean, what I said for years was, I thought JonBenet ate the pineapple by herself. I thought that she went downstairs and just ate a piece of pineapple before she fell asleep again. That, okay, JonBenet's asleep when she comes home from the Christmas party, her father puts her to bed, and then she's just in bed asleep, and then she woke up, went downstairs when everybody else is asleep, ate a piece of pineapple, went back to bed, then the abduction occurred. Lots of kids do things like that. But then I began to wonder that no matter who killed JonBenet, did she eat the pineapple immediately before she died? Like, was this something that the intruder picked up out of the bowl, and just because he saw it on the table, and he put his hand over JonBenet's mouth, and then he's like, shh, be quiet. And then he hands her the piece of pineapple as a type of gesture, and then he lures her to the basement. Was that something that he was trying to do just to get her to be silent? I'm really trying to think about different possibilities here. And of course, there's the most famous story that Burke was eating pineapple and milk. JonBenet stole a piece of his pineapple, so he hit her with a blunt object, and she died, and then the parents staged the scene. What makes the most sense to you? So the next question here is, if the ransom note was a sham, how could the intruder theory work? Oh, amazingly easily. I mean, if the ransom note was a sham, I am somebody who said for the longest time that I thought the ransom note was a sham and the intruder theory was still workable for the following reason. The ransom note was not real. Somebody entered the house when JonBenet was at the Christmas party. They perhaps had 1 to 2 hours in the house before the Ramseys arrived, so they wrote the ransom note to pass the time. They took items from the Ramsey house, and it would have taken approximately 21 minutes to write the ransom note, but, I mean, again, why would they do this? Well, this is going to come into another question. Somebody came into the house for what purpose? Oh, I can answer this question. To murder JonBenet Ramsey. Why did somebody go into the house? To murder JonBenet Ramsey. Was there ever a real kidnapping? No matter what your theory is, no matter whom your suspect is, was there a real kidnapping? Not while JonBenet was alive. That is something that I would say 99%. I don't think anybody actually wanted to take her alive and actually get the ransom money. The whole ransom note thing was a dud. No matter whom your suspect is, no matter what your theory is, I will tell you the ransom note was a dud. They wanted to kill JonBenet. Now, one thing that I did not like hearing in the past was, perhaps somebody tried to hide JonBenet's body in a suitcase that was in the basement. When I first heard about this theory, it was probably 2020. I thought that was the most ridiculous thing in the world. Then, when I was doing my series for Black Box Online Radio, I learned that there were fibers from her pajamas that were found in the suitcase. And I was thinking, maybe there's actually something to that. Somebody murdered JonBenet. Then they wanted to hide her body in the suitcase or transport her out of the house in the suitcase, but either she wouldn't fit, they couldn't get her in, or they just realized that it was impractical, so they left her body in the wine cellar. But why did they go into the house? To murder JonBenet. And let's go to the next question here. So the kidnapper snuck into the house, took JonBenet from her bedroom to the kitchen, fed her pineapple, and then went into the basement and killed her. I mean, question mark? No, I don't think that an intruder would have done that at all. I mean, I think the intruder could have given her the pineapple in the bedroom, could have been holding it in a glove or something like that, as disgusting as it sounds, or JonBenet could have eaten the pineapple by herself by going downstairs without anybody noticing. So, and we have one final set of challenge questions here. So why intentionally kill the kidnap victim before leaving the home? Again, there was no real kidnapping. The kidnapping thing was just a distraction. The kidnapping thing was just something to keep people out of the basement so the killer could get away. The kidnapping thing was just something to confuse the authorities. At one point, they may have wanted to transport her body out of the house, but they would have known that JonBenet was dead. They would have known that she was dead. I don't think anybody ever wanted to claim the $118,000. Otherwise, if they actually wanted money, they would have asked for $1 million. I don't care what John Ramsey's bonus was. That was just some number that they had in their head. Did the intruder actually break into the house with the intent of murdering JonBenet? I think so. And the next question, why? She was a 6-year-old beauty pageant queen, not a capo in a mafia crime family. No evidence in the public record implies that her parents had any criminal connections that could have led to revenge or murder. Okay, wait a second. How about something called a sexual predator? I mean, if she's going to talk about suspects that have been listed off, such as Gary Oliva or the mostly debunked John Mark Carr, then these people are sexual predators. John Mark Carr was, involved with other things. Gary Oliva went to jail for other child-related crimes. Gary Oliva was known to be involved with CP. So, I mean, it's a sexually motivated murder where someone is trying to confuse the authorities. Why would they try to confuse the authorities? Because they did not want to get caught. That is what I genuinely think happened. And even if you think the Ramseys were guilty, same story. The ransom note is a distraction, a diversion, and it's meant to confuse the authorities all across the board. There's no real there's no real attempt to claim the money. This is just somebody who committed a murder and they were trying to cover it up. And as far as the book goes and continues, I mean, ultimately, I said I would get to her conclusion, and she doesn't specifically state that she believes that one of the Ramseys was responsible. However, she does state very clearly that she has a lot of doubts. You heard from that line of questioning, it's definitely leaning toward the Ramseys being responsible. And from reading the sections in her book, I think she zones in on Burke Ramsey, and she believes that Burke did it. But what do you think about any of the things that have been discussed in this episode? What do you think about my responses to the challenge questions? What are your responses to the challenge questions? I would love to read them. And I told you guys I would mention some more things from Perfect Murder, Perfect Town by Lawrence Schiller. In one part of the book, there's a statement that was written by the principal of the elementary school in Boulder, where the media is coming into the school. The media is filming the school. The media is filming all things JonBenet. And not only North American media, there's even a TV network from Japan that is trying to film things about the JonBenet Ramsey case. And the principal of the school sees a student, a young girl around JonBenet's age, who says, "If I died, no one would care about me." So what does the principal do and say? He said, no, that's not true. I would care. And what that girl says is, maybe, but the world wouldn't care. And oh my gosh, that just hit me like a ton of bricks, because I'm somebody who talks about these stories on Black Box Online Radio, and I try to talk about different types of stories. And it's not only just, as you heard, about North American stories or things from the US and Europe. I've also covered things from Australia, Turkey, even Somalia here on Black Box Online Radio. I mean, I don't care about someone's type of origin, and that's not the focus. I mean, if there is something that is a genuine human experience, we all have these types of emotional connections to it. But then when the girl said it that way, I thought she was right. The principal thought she was right, just that certain true crime cases are going to get more exposure. And this girl, who's probably 6 or 7 years old, is saying they are thinking more about JonBenet because she was rich and pretty. And I guess that girl, who is not mentioned by name, did not think that she was rich and pretty enough to have the same type of media exposure as JonBenet. Now, let's be clear, it's not a competition, but I completely saw her point when she's saying that certain cases are going to get more attention than other cases. And a big reason why the JonBenet Ramsey case has been so widely publicized has been because of the pageantry that JonBenet was associated with. And it was the Ramseys' idea to release the pageant videos and photos, even though that stuff would have come out eventually. And there also is one final thing that I do want to touch upon. There was that challenge question from the book Anthrax to Zodiac, which also has a JonBenet section that says, who would want to murder JonBenet? Now, there are things about the pageant world. People, mostly users online, have said that their theory is that JonBenet was killed by an intruder because of the pageantry, and saying the pageant world is cutthroat. Maybe she was killed by a rival, someone was jealous of her, and their parent committed the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. Well, I mean, I certainly don't subscribe to that theory. I don't think there's enough evidence for that. But when I was reading this book and this section from Denise Diane Huddle, it starts out with what I'm going to conclude with. And it's not about the story of JonBenet at all. She actually writes a very scathing piece to introduce the JonBenet Ramsey case that discusses pageantry, specifically the show Toddlers and Tiaras. Again, this is not related to the JonBenet Ramsey case at all. And I was reading through this, and I'm like, okay, well, when are you going to get to the point, and when are you going to just give us the analysis about the JonBenet story? And she even tells the story of an individual named Kylia Posey, who was on the show Toddlers and Tiaras, and she was also involved with, her face was taken and put onto a meme and a GIF, which it seemed like she was totally comfortable with at first. But what Denise Diane Huddle is trying to do is to illustrate the point that Kylia Posey committed suicide at age 16, and ultimately, she's saying that these types of things are bad experiences for kids, they can be very problematic, and they can have disastrous effects and consequences, and ultimately, not only pageantry, but shows like Toddlers and Tiaras are bad. And even though I was preparing this episode on JonBenet Ramsey, I was reading her book to read about the case of JonBenet Ramsey, as well as the other stories that she's talked about that get featured on Black Box Online Radio. I had never heard of Kylie Posey before, but I had that experience that I was just talking to you about. I want to know more about somebody's story, so I decided to read about Kylie Posey as well as watch some videos about her. And there's an article from People magazine, and I was hesitant to read it because it came to the top of the search results, and sometimes People magazine can post some very unflattering stuff, but overall it was fairly respectful. It talked about how she was a beauty queen, and she won lots of pageants, and she committed suicide at the age of 16. And it was very, very similar to the phrasing that was used on Inside Edition. But as far as Toddlers and Tiaras or the pageant world being bad, it appears that there's a little bit more to the story. 7 News Australia actually did some investigations into the murder of Kylie Posey, and their case shows that it really wasn't the pageant world at all, because it appears that she was being bullied and harassed beyond her mental fortitude, beyond anything that she could tolerate. And I'm just going to read a section here, and it says, "But what Kylie Posey wasn't telling her mom is that bullies moved online. For months, the 16-year-old bottled up the angst and the cyber hate, and that it was causing her. The angst that the cyber hate was causing her, excuse me. Her mother had no idea what her daughter was holding on to. So as Kylie got dressed up for the prom, her mother began looking at her beautiful girl in a floor-length shimmering gown, and Kylie flashed her infamous smile. 2 days later, she would be found dead." And she actually died because of asphyxiation. But, I'm just going to read some of the things that they shared in this 7 News article when she was being bullied online, when people are just sending her messages, and forgive my language, but I do want to read these quotations. "You're literally a piece of shit human," one message read. "You're honestly fucked up," another one says. "I'm big mad at you right now." And this had been going on for months, where people are just sending her all of these things over and over again, and it took its toll on her. And she reached a breaking point. And I think one of the reasons why her name is included in Denise Diane Huddle's book is because it was just so shocking. She had been on the show Toddlers and Tiaras. She had competed in pageants all around the country, and she was a contortionist. That was her talent. And it was actually reported that she was going to work for Cirque du Soleil. So she had all of these opportunities where she wasn't just somebody who was competing. She was a star. And she had real-world chances for growth and fame from the pageant world, and it was just so shocking that she committed suicide. However, it seems like the ultimate reason, though, was not the pageants at all. It was cyberbullying. It was harassment. And 99% of you guys are absolutely respectful in the comment section. You're all amazing. It's that dangerous 1% that has to be removed from the channel most of the time. And I just wanted to conclude with that story because it's written in the book. And also, my take on this book by Denise Diane Huddle is, I've read her sections on the anthrax killer, D.B. Cooper, and now JonBenet Ramsey. Absolutely. Out of those 3 sections, the story of JonBenet is at the top for me. And I think one of the reasons why is that she presents this as a private investigator is giving her interpretations of the evidence. But I really didn't find that she's using too many sources that a private investigator could use. For example, in the D.B. Cooper case, she's citing the Mountain News, she's citing comments that people have left online, and I'm like, well, all of this stuff is out there. This stuff's already available. You can just use a Google searches to get the information. And a lot of that is in the JonBenet Ramsey case as well. But I'm just thinking, as a private investigator, I would have expected more. And you guys might be thinking, well, Ned, don't you do that on Black Box Online Radio? You were just reading an article from 7 News Australia. Yes, but one thing that I do want to reinforce, and that is that I am not a private investigator. I am not a detective. And I've said that since 2018. This is a social commentary channel where I respond to the news. I do look at things like the case files and documents, as well as other interpretations of the evidence that have been shared by detectives. And John Lorden of the Lorden Arts channel said, a great way, though, to stay in touch with the media is when detectives and the chief of police give press conferences. They can often share facts and updates if you trust them. Let's not kid ourselves. Sometimes they do lie to us. But overall, though, this is a commentary channel, And this book definitely feels more like a commentary than an in-depth private investigator conducting, well, a solid investigation. And because I've been following true crime cases for over 30 years, and I watch the shows like anybody else, 48 Hours and Dateline, sometimes 2020, and you can see private investigators that go all out and do absolutely marvelous investigations where they just hyper analyze pieces of evidence and security footage and photographs, and they find something that nobody else would have found. I haven't quite found that in this book yet, but I've gone through 3 of those sections. I'll be looking at the Zodiac Killer section next, and I would love to know what you guys think about anything in this episode. You know where to write the show, blackboxonlineradio at AOL.com. There's also a Facebook page for Black Box Online Radio, and BlackBoxNed88 on TikTok and Instagram. And I use those to release shorts Monday through Friday, mostly talking about serial killers, true crime news, but anything under the sun or in the darkness is fair game. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And that's all for me now. Until next time.